If you look at the Forbes list of the richest people in the world, you will notice something extremely odd. All the rich people are presented with perfect professional photos. But of all people, the wealthiest man in Germany, one of the richest countries in the world, has no picture at all. This is not an error made by Forbes. There is simply no official picture of Dieter Schwartz, the $40 billion phantom. Schwartz does everything he can to stay under the radar. He disguises his identity, refuses every interview, and does everything in his power to prevent pictures of him from reaching the public. He didn't even turn up when he was made an honorary citizen of his hometown because he didn't want to appear in public. And although Dieter Schwartz is a phantom, he is incredibly influential. Like a puppeteer, he controls the fate of a German city. He is called the King of Heilbronn by many. But who is Dieter Schwartz, and how did he become so incredibly rich? In this video, we explore the secrets of the $40 billion phantom. The story of Dieter Schwartz begins with his father, Josef. In 1930, a few years before the Nazis first took over Germany and then dragged it into the abyss, Josef Schwartz acquired a stake in a small shop called Lidl. The ambitious Josef quickly converted the business into a wholesale grocery store. But the dream of success does not last long. The business is destroyed during the war in 1944. Is everything over now? No, because within a few years, Lidl rises like a phoenix from the ashes. The company was rebuilt and found its home in Heilbronn, a city whose fate was to change as a result. But we'll come to that later. Josef's son, Dieter Schwartz, was born in 1939, the year the Second World War broke out. At the end of the 1950s, he takes his Abitur, the highest school-leaving qualification in Germany. He actually wanted to go to university afterwards, but his father orders Dieter Schwartz to become part of the family business instead. On this fateful day, Josef practically forced his son to become the richest man in Germany more than 60 years later, even though, of course, no one had any idea about that at the time. And so the future phantom Dieter Schwartz joins Lidl, where he soon becomes a young manager. At that time, however, Lidl was still part of an association of several companies and not independent. Even though Schwartz has to be pushed to make his fortune in retail, he brings a great deal of fresh ideas with him and gradually reorganizes the Lidl concept according to his own ideas. Schwartz realizes early on that he has to focus on discount prices in order for the company to grow. Cheap is the future, a motto that would put Lidl in the fast lane, but we are not quite there yet. In 1968, Schwartz founded another supermarket, which would later establish the Kaufland brand, another well-known German brand. In 1973, Schwartz is finally able to realize his idea of a real discount store and to become independent. He would like to call the store Lidl, just as his father's shop was called. But there was a problem. Lidl is not his own name, so he is not allowed to use it for legal reasons. But Dieter doesn't want to call his shop Schwarzmarkt after himself, because that is the German word for black market and could unsettle customers. So Dieter Schwartz favors marketing over his own vanity. He manages to outwit the law and get his way with a trick. He simply buys the rights to the name of an uninvolved old teacher whose surname is Lidl, and from then on can legally call his new discounter as he desires. I really wonder if the old teacher realized that he would become the namesake of a brand that generates billions every year. Dieter Schwartz's concept is a goldmine, and Lidl grows at lightning speed. Just 4 years after the first shop opened, there were already 30 Lidl shops. Not everyone was happy about that. With his favorable prices, he pushes smaller stores out of the market because they simply cannot keep up financially. But the criticism does not stop the success. In 1977, Dieter's father, Josef, dies. A year later, Dieter made a decision that still characterizes the Schwartz empire today. He separated his two successful brands conceptually. Under the name Lidl, he quickly expanded with discounters and low prices, and under the name Kaufland, Schwartz opened supermarkets with a different range and higher prices. Today, both brands are extremely successful and represented internationally. Lidl begins to expand internationally in 1989. Today, there are 12,200 shops worldwide, employing 360,000 people. The chain has a yearly turnover of more than $100 billion. Lidl has also been present in the USA since 2017 and has opened more than 180 shops in just 6 years. And the other brand, Kaufland, also has over 1,000 shops, although Kaufland has so far only expanded outside Germany into Eastern Europe. And so, Dieter Schwartz, a child of the war whose father's business was destroyed in 1944, has become the richest man in Germany. Despite his enormous wealth, Dieter Schwartz has always remained in the background. For a long time, the only photograph that existed of him was an old black and white photo. You heard right, a black and white photograph. It was still being used by magazines in 2004 because there were simply no other photos available. Schwartz does everything he can to avoid being photographed and recognized. But why did Dieter Schwartz become a phantom in the first place? As he does not give interviews, it is impossible to give a definitive answer. There are speculations that it has something to do with a series of terrible crimes that took place in the 1970s, the decade in which he became rich and successful. Back then, industrialists or their children were repeatedly kidnapped and sometimes even murdered by a terrorist group. A writer for the German magazine Der Spiegel once suggested that there was also a threat against Dieter Schwartz's children. However, the Phantom will probably never tell us whether this is true. Some time ago, however, Schwartz was photographed in a secret snapshot. It is the only recent picture of him, as his other picture was almost 40 years old. The snapshot shows an inconspicuous person in a suit that doesn't look particularly expensive. You would hardly recognize Schwartz on the street. No comparison to dazzling billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or Richard Branson. And that is also the description his companions give of him. Schwartz is said to be an inconspicuous, reserved man. Sometimes the $40 billion Phantom sits among ordinary citizens in the audience at the opera or with his wife in a restaurant. There is only one place in the world where Dieter Schwartz is known, and that is his hometown of Heilbronn, the place where he was born, and the place where his enormous success began. The people of Heilbronn know Schwartz as a man who shapes the city with his investments and donations like no other. But not everyone is happy about it. Heilbronn is a city in the south of Germany with a population of just under 130,000. It is a beautiful city, but for a long time it was not particularly important. This has changed since Dieter Schwartz decided to become a patron at the end of the 1990s. Unlike some millionaires, he did not decide to support a sports club or patronize an art museum, but instead chose to support the city of Heilbronn. Even though Heilbronn is an old city, it did not have a university for a long time. Dieter Schwartz's money is changing that. He has invested around $500 million in an educational campus with various educational and research facilities. Thanks to these conditions, the renowned Technical University of Munich has decided to set up a branch in Heilbronn, and this despite the fact that Heilbronn and Munich are more than 250 kilometers apart and not even in the same state. Schwartz's investment is controversial. Some people think it's great that a billionaire is investing so much money in education. Others, however, fear that a private individual is gaining more influence over the structural development of a whole city than ever before. Schwartz not only finances the infrastructure, but also around a third of all professors who work at the School of Management at the Technical University of Munich. This is despite the fact that the university is actually a state institution and not a private university. Critics are now asking, however, whether with so much money, it can be ruled out that Schwartz is not influencing the direction of teaching and research of a state university like the Technical University of Munich. Schwartz's next investment in Heilbronn was announced in mid-2023. This time he plans to establish a center for artificial intelligence to make Heilbronn a German pioneer in this field. It is difficult to assess Schwartz's patronage. On the one hand, there is no question that the city is growing and many jobs are being created because of him. But on the other hand, it is a case of a public city that only grows in the direction that a private individual sets. Some people therefore think that it would be fairer to simply tax someone like Dieter Schwartz more heavily and give the money to the general public instead of letting him decide what he does and does not support. However, most Heilbronn residents are very fond of Schwartz and view his investment favorably. The fact that Lidl has also made negative headlines in the past could not change this. In 2008, the company was involved in perhaps the biggest scandal in the retail sector that year. At that time, it came to light that Lidl was monitoring employees with cameras and using detectives to also monitor them. It was even noted when employees went to the toilet, and who had a love affair with whom. At the time, insiders described a culture at Lidl in which employees were constantly afraid of losing their jobs because of how they were controlled by the spies and the cameras. But Lidl is skillful at surviving such scandals and continuing to grow nonetheless. Another anecdote shows how creative they are at solving problems. In the 2000s, Lidl had problems with Greenpeace because Lidl's fruit and vegetables were allegedly contaminated with pesticides. It was therefore very surprising when Lidl suddenly started buying extremely large quantities of Greenpeace's magazine a short time later. Every 2 months, half of the total print run of the Greenpeace magazine was delivered to Lidl and sold prominently in the shop. And the dispute between Greenpeace and Lidl was suddenly forgotten. What a great coincidence. So nothing could really stop the rise of Lidl and Kaufland, and thus the immense success of Dieter Schwartz, the $40 billion phantom. He may be over 80 years old today, but his wealth has just reached a new peak. Long live the King of Heilbronn!